John Schumann, REDGUM, what a treat to meet you. Thanks for your time today.
Sandy, delighted to be here.
You were one iconic band in Australia, weren't you? You really set the pace for a whole lot of bands to come, and you changed generations of music listeners here. For the audiences who don't know anything about REDGUM, John Schumann, can you sum up who you were?
How do I put this? REDGUM was a kind of country stroke folk rock band from Adelaide. We came out of Flinders University, and we came out with a philosophy and a set of principles about what we were going to do. And that was, we didn't want necessarily to sing songs about love and heartbreak and strewing caraway seeds around the canyons of mine. We actually came into the industry with a very strong belief that art and music, should serve a purpose. And for me, my own particular philosophy was, look, I have been gifted with, a distinctive, some might say irritating voice, but a distinctive voice and a capacity to put together simple tunes and tell stories. And I've been able to make my living, by and large, from that for most of my life. And I figure that I needed to pay back that gift to my fellow human beings, and that is by, as I said, not being introspective and whatever else, but trying to, sing songs and make observations, tell stories that will make a difference, that will ultimately help improve the world in which we all live. A grandiose statement, I understand that, and I know that some
you did manage to do that. I mean, REDGUM was a band who really helped shape the history of the Australian music scene, and you had a massive influence on that scene. You were one of the first bands to start singing about Australiana, about local places and local characters. And I guess that fit right into the ethos that you've just talked about how you wanted to help shape the country.
Yeah, we did. Look, it's nice of you to say that we were an influence. I actually think we were. And I mean, I'm sort of resigned to this, but history, music industry history belongs to Melbourne and Sydney. But when I do look back at what we did then and the barriers that we broke down, there were lots of bands and artists that followed in our wake that wouldn't really be able to do what they're doing now and to sing the way they sing now and to actually sing like Australian men and women. Had REDGUM not proved to the Australian music industry there was an eager market for that. So,
that's
right. I'm
thinking of... You kind of gave us all permission to be proud of this country and to take our music to a different level. I mean, before that, we'd been a country that was accepting and lapping up music from America and music from the UK. We didn't have any of our own music, did we?
Well, we sort of did, but it was it was almost like lots of people were sort of dancing on the edges of the Australiana firelight. And when we just didn't dance on the edges, we went and stood right up close to the fire. And look, we copped a lot of flack for it, and it was pretty hard to break down. I remember we had radio stations and television programs saying to the record company and our management people that, look, we can't really have REDGUM music on the air because it doesn't fit in with our format. The voice is too Australian, the stories are too Australian. And that used to drive me completely nuts. I'm going, what is it about our country that our radio stations and our television programs refuse to acknowledge, who we are and what we are? And one of the things that drives me completely nuts even today is that lots of our artists, tend to, sing like Americans, and I just don't get it. Though I have to say, in fairness, when I first began to sing, I too sang like an American. And my dear friend and one of the people who was instrumental in the formation of REDGUM said to me, this is Professor Brian Medland, he said to me, "Why are you singing like a Yank?" And I said, I'm not. He said, yes, you are. And I played a cassette of a performance that we did, and yes, I was singing like an American. So initially, I really had to push that pendulum back right towards, the sort of the far end of the Australian accent scale. And when I hear our first album, it was quite very distinctively ochre. And I think gradually, as I sort of relaxed into finding the Australian voice, the genuine Australian voice, I found my own voice, and the pendulum swung back a bit. Certainly, I don't ever sing like an American, but I think it sort of moved back. It was less, deeply strine, deeply nasal, and I think I now, after all these years, I've actually found
middle ground.
My own voice. Yeah.
Right. John, give us an example of one of the songs from that first album that we can play to hear you singing so ochre. And ochre, of course, is the slang, is the way that Australians speak at the most Australian level, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, look, I wrote a song, I think it was one of the very earliest songs about Indigenous Australia, called Carrington Cabaret, and that's on the first album, If You Don't Fight, You Lose. And I wrote that song observing the way we dealt with Indigenous Australians from the front seat of a taxi. When I was at university, I drove cabs to, that was my job, and it was an amazing educational experience. And Carrington Cabaret was, I think, one of the very first songs that pointed out the injustice that white Australia had wreaked upon Indigenous Australia.
Yeah.
Long time, may I say, before Midnight Oil. And when I hear my voice, I can hear that very distinctive, like hard ochre strine. But as I said, over the years, if you listen to my work since then, the pendulum swung back, and as I said, I found my own kind of voice.
Yeah, you were always very deeply focused on social equality, on political and economic justice, weren't you? When did you make the decision to start writing and singing about these things?
Well, look, that was probably, well, I think most definitely from a course that all of us in REDGUM did, called Politics and Art, which was offered under the auspices of the philosophy department at Flinders University, taught by my very good friend, dear friend and lifelong mentor, Brian Medlin. And that course examined the nature of the relationship between art and politics. And it was very clear to me that there was a road down which our band could march, and nobody else was on it. But I mean, in terms of social justice and like a fair go, I think I always had that. As a little boy, my mum would tell stories about how I would always play with and look after the unpopular kids, the kids who didn't have what the rest of us had at school, and Mum was actually quite worried. She thought I was going to be antisocial, but I think it was something in me, and I was educated in the Dominican tradition, which is something that our family had for decades, and I was sent to be taught at the none too gentle hands of the Dominican fathers on Prospect Road in Adelaide, and those blokes also had a very keen sense of justice and fair play. And I think that just insinuated itself into my spirit, into my being, into the, and then informed, I suppose, that, my work from then until now. As I said, I don't want to necessarily write songs about love and heartbreak and somebody else's girlfriend and, mindless introspection. I mean, other people do that and they do it well, but that's not for me.
Yeah, and you certainly haven't made that your business at all. You've written about things that you've seen and felt passionately about. I mean, growing up in Adelaide, I can't imagine what that was like for you, if we're led to believe it wasn't all that good, if we take heed of the song that you wrote, One More Boring Night in Adelaide.
Yeah, that was a bit of a poke in the ribs for Adelaide. I mean, and I think it was back then it was really about, I suppose, for a want of a better term, bourgeois art, where, I mean, we were the festival state, and we were at the forefront of artistic expression. We had Don Dunstan was the premier, so the arts were very big on the landscape. But it was, in my view, given the fact that I'm, sort of politically and socio-economically directed, that art seemed to be a triumph of form over content. So One More Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide was one of the very first songs I ever wrote, and it was really about, I don't know, it was a reflection of, like adolescent angst, if you like, but it also, devolved to this observation about, the festival theatre and, plush red seats and the need for change, particularly on the arts landscape.
Right. So was Adelaide a boring city to live in?
No, actually, Adelaide's fantastic. Adelaide is the best kept secret. I mean, Melbourne and Sydney, often tend to sneer at Adelaide, but we're quite happy with that. Just stay away. We have a lovely life here. We have great food, great wine. It's very clean. It's large enough to have everything that we want, small enough for us to be able to get out of town and onto the dirt within about 5 or 6 hours. We're very happy here. Thank you very much.
John, 1983 saw your #1 classic hit, I Was Only 19. That just stormed up the charts everywhere, didn't it? It was the first breakthrough hit that you had that went beyond these country walls. Tell us a little bit about I Was Only 19.
Well, I Was Only 19 was written through the eyes of my brother-in-law, Mick Storen, who went to Vietnam in 1969 and was involved in that mine incident, which I describe in the song. For me, writing I Was Only 19 was an exercise in There But For the Grace of God Go I, because I was old enough to have had Vietnam on my horizon as a young man. And to be perfectly frank, I had no idea of the geopolitical ramifications of the war. I was just a kid who spent most of his time outdoors, camping and hiking and bushwalking and orienteering and pioneering and doing all that stuff. So the army held no terrors for me. War held no terrors because, what do kids know? So I know that had I been called up, had I been conscripted, I wouldn't have resisted, I would have gone. Look, there was a tradition in my family. My grandfather was a marksman on a minesweeper in the First World War, and my dad was in the RAAF in Darwin in the Second World War. So it's what you did. You grew up, you left school, you did your bit for the country, and then you came home and got on with your life. So it was kind of in the family tradition. Right. But mercifully, Whitlam stopped conscription just before my marble was due to go into the barrel. But I did have friends who went to Vietnam, and I saw them return fundamentally altered. And my heart went out to these guys because as I said, I thought, there but for the grace of God go I. Yeah. So anyway, but I didn't want to write a song based on my own imagination and what I could remember from news broadcast at the time. But I met my brother-in-law. When I started going out with my wife Denny, and she's mentioned in the song in the first line, and he agreed to tell me his story, and he told me his story, and I mulled on it for about 9 months, and then in 15 minutes I wrote I Was Only 19.
It was a hugely influential song. In fact, it precipitated a royal commission into the use and effects of chemical agents in the Vietnam War by the Australian military, didn't it?
Yeah, look, I think it contributed very significantly. Look, Australians, I believe, are a fair and decent mob. A lot of us blamed the Vietnam veteran for what went on in that war. We didn't stop to think that they were just doing the job that the government had sent them to do. They came back, they were fundamentally physically and psychologically damaged by the experience. Not all of them, but enough of them. But I think we were so concerned with, our own sort of political rectitude that we didn't actually stop and think about the effect of that war, that conflict on the men and the women that our government sent to fight it. I was only 19 as the story, 4 minutes, 19 seconds. And I think it enabled Australians to just look over the back fence, into the backyard of the Vietnam veteran down the road and go, oh, okay, I get it. And as I said, we are fundamentally fair and decent. And I think, and we respond best to stories. So I think, 19 was certainly very influential in helping to bring the Vietnam veterans home. And I'm very proud of that. But I have to say that there was a lot of other work that was done as well. A lot of hard academic work, research, papers, parliamentary inquiries, all of that stuff. But I think, I was only 19 was the sort of the icing across the top of the cake that made everybody want to have a slice and see what it tastes like.
Yeah, absolutely. The following year, another great song. I mean, for people who don't know, Bali in Indonesia is the Australian playground, and you came out with the song, which was a bit of a poke in the side to Bali, wasn't it? It was called "I've Been to Bali Too." What were you thinking?
It was really a poke in the ribs to Australians. It was really trying to tell a story in a sort of humorous, satirical way, to say, look, this is not a third world playground, guys. This is actually a very deeply spiritual, culturally deeply rich island, and it's fantastic to visit. But it's not just a place for you to get pissed and throw up in the streets, and that's really what it was about. But it was a gentle poke in the ribs. Look, I also wrote it at the time. The 60 Minutes program had just done a hatchet job on the Denpasar Hospital, and of course, what that meant was that suddenly visitors to Bali from Australia, dived. The numbers dived, and I just thought that was a little bit unfair. So it was a combination of, hey, respect the joint, but go. Don't believe everything you see on television, but understand that you are going to a very sacred spiritual island that is worth much more than you and your surfboard and a belly full of beer on the streets of Kuta.
Yeah, I hear you. Your songs were always fun, but with a deep message behind them, which was really wonderful. You're a deep thinker for sure. It's been a long time since we've seen another song from REDGUM. Of course, the band, that original band, disbanded after weathering several lineup changes, and you actually added a didgeridoo in there at some point too. What have you been doing since REDGUM disbanded?
Well, look, I left REDGUM in 1986. I just got, to be perfectly frank, I got tired of it. I didn't really like the direction the rest of the band wanted to go. We went overseas and we were very popular. And we did very, very well on the festival circuit. We were a bit of a hit. So the management wanted us to write songs with an international bent, and I wasn't very keen on that. I'm an Australian bloke and I wanted to write songs about my people and my country. So for a whole host of reasons, I left. I think the band, went on for a few years after that. But frankly, I think I can say this now. I think the ethos and the identity of the band diminished when I left, and it really became a bit like my granddad's fishing knife, 5 new blades and 3 new handles, and it was as good as the day he bought it. I did a couple of solo albums and did a couple of solo tours. But then I had a bit of a break for about 10 or 15 years while the kids were young. I wanted to be home and be a husband and a dad, and you can't do that from Tarago on the Hume Highway with 6 men who burp and fart and tell the same jokes. But in 2005, my very close friend of mine, David Mania, persuaded me to do a recording project with him as executive producer. And so I recorded with David's help. In fact, I couldn't have done it without him. An album of songs based on the poems of Henry Lawson, and that was and released that in 2005, and that really kick-started my musical career again. You know, it put me back in the limelight. The album was very, very well received, and in fact was quite influential, and still sells very well today, notwithstanding Spotify.
And tell us just who Henry Lawson is briefly.
Oh, okay. For those listeners who haven't heard of Henry Lawson was one of the great early Australian writers. Look, he was flawed, defeated, dysfunctional. He was an alcoholic. He was a lousy husband and a lousy father. But he had one great gift that he gave us. He found the voice of Australia in literature, and he showed us how to listen to it, that voice. And for that, we owe him. So while I am not blind to Henry Lawson's, faults and failings, and particularly if you look back now from the lofty perspective of the woke culture. I mean, yeah. Henry Lawson, there were all sorts of things wrong with Henry, absolutely. But you know what? He found our voice. He found our voice, and in poetry and short stories, and so much so that he's become a bit of a passion of mine. So the album was a terrific project, and I was able to invite friends of mine from the music industry to come and sing and play and perform with me. Robbie Hurst from Midnight Oil played drums and sang on a couple of tracks. My friend Shane Howard from Goanna came. Russell Morris, Mike Rudd from Spectrum. Wow. In fact, the great Australian band, the Dingoes, reformed on one track. In fact, REDGUM, we hadn't played together for almost 20 years. And we reformed on one track, which was great fun. And that album was so successful that I was encouraged to put a band to get together under the banner of the Vagabond Crew, and that band has sort of continued now for 17 years.
So you still play with the Vagabond?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. In fact, it's the Vagabond Crew that, with the Vagabond Crew, we'll be performing the Lawson album with the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra on the 100th anniversary of Lawson's death on September the 2nd this year, 2022. So with the ASO and narrated by Richard Roxburgh.
Wow, that'll be a huge event. What was I going to say? Do you have a track on that album that's the closest to your heart?
Yeah, I think on the Lawson album. Look, I like all of them. I am very proud of the album, but one that speaks to me is a poem which I put to music called "Second Class Wait Here." It's it speaks for itself, but it really does resonate very much with my strong desire for equality and dignity for everybody.
Right. Okay, we'll have a listen to that. Is there anywhere that people are going to be able to see this concert, or it'll be released on an album?
No. Look, it's going to be a one-off in Adelaide at the Festival Theatre. As I said, so like it's going to be a live event. There's no plans to film it or record it. Look, hopefully, if it goes well and it bears all the hallmarks of a success, then we will take it around Australia, hopefully, and and do it with the other symphony orchestras. But that's a long-term project. The main thing is to get this one up and make it successful.
And I'm sure it will be. So you're not averse to getting back out on the road again?
No. But look, these days, you know, that a tour for us old blokes is, you know, sort of 3 or 4 days away. You know, we fly somewhere, stay in a nice hotel, play 3 or 4 shows, and then come home and collapse exhausted into our beds. But you know, the days of, you know, 3 months national tours are over. I mean, I think they're over anyway. And I'm just not interested in doing that. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt. I'd much prefer to do, you know, like guerrilla strikes, you know, here and there and elsewhere.
Fabulous. And that work, if you do take it on the road, will we hear any songs from REDGUM as well?
Not in the Lawson show, but the other show that we have, which we are beginning to tour, is a show called the REDGUM Years, and that is essentially the Vagabond Crew revisiting all those songs of REDGUM that I don't do in my ordinary show. And it's really interesting when I look at that repertoire, Sandy. I expected that when we resurrected it, that they were just going to be exercises in nostalgia. But interestingly, 90% of those songs work just as hard in the Australia of 2022 as they did when we wrote and performed them originally, which is very heartening but very frightening, because what it means is those battles that we thought that we had won back then, we're still fighting.
Yeah, you're not the first person to tell me that. It's quite amazing how appropriate songs still are 50 years later, how little the world has changed, or changed in ways that haven't made any difference at all to the big issues. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I believe they had to twist your arm quite heavily to revisit those REDGUM songs, huh?
Yeah, well, look, it was my band, the Vagabond Crew, the boys in the band. I mean, because, you know, we'd go out and we'd do, you know, my solo repertoire, and you know, some of the songs that I contributed to the REDGUM repertoire, like Bali and 19 and all that sort of stuff. But there would always be people calling out for, you know, their favourite REDGUM songs, and I didn't actually want to go back and, well, I mean, there was always pressure to reform REDGUM, and we never got around to it. And then Hugh McDonald, who was, you know, my best mate, and he played with me in the Vagabond Crew, he died, and when he died in 2016, then I just had no heart for. There's no point, because for me, you know, REDGUM was largely, you know, sort of him and me and Michael and Verity, and Michael and Verity didn't want to tour, and I wasn't going to do it without Hugh anyway. So the idea of a REDGUM reformation is just out the window. But my band said, "Look, Shuey, you should do these songs." So and I said, "Yeah, but I don't want to go out and pretend I'm REDGUM, because I'm not, and that's not what I don't want to look back over my shoulder. You know, as a rock writer and a performer, I've always looked down the road, you know, not back over my shoulder." But the boys said, "Look, why don't we do a show called the REDGUM Years, and we can do all that. We'll learn all those songs, all those great songs that we haven't played." So we did it, and lo and behold, bingo! Everybody wanted to come and see it. So
of course they did.
Yeah. So, and it's good, you know. Like, it's not just a kind of a sad exercise in nostalgia. It's, you know, there's stories and the songs, as I said, work just as hard. The band is great. My band is fantastic. I mean, it is a real world-class band. I'm very proud of them, and I'm delighted and I'm very proud to have them play my songs, and they love the songs. So it's an adventure for all of us, while we pay tribute to the REDGUM Years, but we don't pretend to be REDGUM, even though I suppose there are some who might say that, you know, in large part, well, I was a large part of REDGUM.
You were.
In terms of the songs that
You
I
absolutely
contributed and my, you know, my face and my voice.
Yeah.
And the beard, which is a little bit grey these days.
We've all got that going on. John Schumann, what a delight to chat with you. I thank you so much for your time, and we can't wait to see you